They got rid of the wrestling program at my high school. I know happens kind of more and more, but they got rid of the wrestling program at our high school. And I think one of my great goals would be, even though I wasn't a wrestler, to get them to reinstitute it. Mm-hmm. But what I might have to do is hire Frank.
Hire Shute to come in there.
Absolutely. I'm going to hire Frank, and we're going to go into my old high school and be like, look, I fucking brought Shute. You're putting the wrestling team back together again. I might have to, man. I might hit you up on it. So just look out.
Yeah, have a log ready, man, because if we're going to go in, we got to go in big. And I'll carry a log in. And
what is going on, everyone? Tis Miyanovich, and I welcome you to the main dojo. The place where we process the raw struggles of men in an unprecedented paradigm. There is something inside of you that wants you to be more than what you are. But there also may be something inside of you that wants you to go down. And for some of us, that means going down for good. So, remove your ego, drop your bullshit, become vulnerable, and step into the dojo, mate. Okay, so I don't even like this. I have been podcasting for about 4 years, and my wife is in the Podcast Hall of Fame. She's a really high level podcaster in the world. And so I take all my direction from her, all my equipment, like all my understanding came from her. And I have done hundreds of podcasts in the field that I am in, which currently is the world of firearms, believe it or not, professional firearms. Okay. But I'm just telling you, Frank, I have never been this excited about a podcast episode, dude. So thank you. Like, I can't believe you said yes. I knew about you, like after what you had done after, Vision Quest, because I ended up looking you up for some reason. I saw that you did like, Oriental healing arts and Qigong, and that's what I did for a living for a while.
Oh, really? That's so interesting.
Was it like meditation and Qigong and Tai Chi and Reiki and things like that? Uh-huh. So I was like, wow, Shute got into like the deep internal martial arts and healing arts. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I did this thing where is for the first 28 years of my life, I was a warrior, you know, and it was a martial arts warrior. I was, you know, the age-old story of like I was really small, believe it or not. I was a little guy. I was kind of a smart ass, and so I got into some, you know, stuff with most of the time it was the bullies in school, and so part of my dive into martial arts was that, and then eventually bodybuilding was to like, oh, I'm just going to become so great at martial arts, and then I was going to be so big that nobody was going to ever mess with me. That was like that old Charles Atlas kickstand in your face, you know, thing.
Yeah.
And so the first 28 years of my life, I did a lot of martial arts. I did my own practice. My dad was a judo instructor. And so in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, we learned how to throw and to fall and to roll, which I think everybody should learn how to do that. It's like brilliant. It saved me. I can't tell you how many times, like I stubbed my toe or I had something and I was carrying it and I stubbed my toe and I fell forward and my body just naturally rolled. Otherwise I would have just splayed out and just, you know, injured myself probably. But in this moment, my body knew what to do. So those martial arts trainings were super helpful, I think, my entire life. That was my first 28. I mean, I was into Kempo karate. I was, you know, spending time with a blindfold on, practicing martial arts and, you know, doing all of those things. And then it's interesting as I got into what I wanted to do for a living. It was like, well, I love bodybuilding. I love nutrition. I have anatomy, physiology. I love sports. I'm going to be an athletic trainer. So that's what I went back to school to get. And from that point on, it was like, here's my healing process. And so then instead of doing the physical outward martial arts and bodybuilding and to build up the body and, everything was about being tough and strong and all of that, it was all about internal healing, Qigong, Tai Chi, Reiki, and, you just shared with me that you were into all these things as well. I was a big fan of, what is the Shogun that they just redid? And I was a big fan. I mean, I read the Shogun book. I was big into martial arts, and I didn't even know I was going to get into acupuncture at that time. I was just fascinated with the whole Bushido martial arts, warrior, like they died before they went into war. And because it's like a second and you could be dead. And so you can't have one piece of fear there that's going to slow your movement down for you to draw your sword or to evade a blade. You had to be fully committed and just knew that, like, I died already, so there's nothing they could do to me that's going to, change who I am. So I'm going in there with everything.
Yeah.
Focused, singular focused.
Yeah. As I mentioned when we were talking before I hit the record button, my mom and my stepdad are all really good people, in their hearts. But, I had a biological father and his side of the family were highly dysfunctional, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of abuse and neglect kind of coming from both sides of the family.
Yeah.
The good news is my mom and my stepdad really got their shit together by the time, I was in my 20s. They really, they were always good people, but they weren't healthy.
Yeah. They were trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a lot of dark and bad, stuff happened to me. I was a good kid. I was a jock, but, like by the time I was 16, I was like a full blown alcoholic and I had an eating disorder and like depression and all kinds of stuff. But I got on the other side of that pretty early, like about 21. I stopped drinking completely. I still haven't consumed alcohol since I've been 21 years old. So over 30 years. But I followed, the instruction from some people to get into meditation, and I did, and it had a powerful transformational effect on me. And so I ended up studying, like I got teachers from all over the world, Tibetans, Indians, Japanese cats from the States, cats from Europe. Yeah. Like I went for it. And I almost became a monk in the Dracun Kagyu Tibetan lineage.
Wow.
So like it hit me strong, man, strong. And during that time, I was studying Japanese jiu-jitsu. The one master I had was Japanese jiu-jitsu. It had a lot of Aikido in it. It had a little more, it was like a softer jiu-jitsu, but he was big on Qigong. And so I got really into Qigong and Tai Chi, but more into Qigong. So I was hanging with the Tibetans and learning like green Tara practice and all kinds of really esoteric stuff with them. And then I got into the Japanese side and then the Chinese side with Qigong. So that was my life, man, for a long time. Dude, I'm sure you've gone through it. Every dietary approach, every Asian dietary idea, all of it, from fasting to combining food to whatever, vegetarianism for 4 years. Like I was really in the middle of that, and it had a transformative effect. But I went soft because the hardness in my life was from the dysfunction. Yeah. Right. So I kind of had an aversion towards, I don't know, like classic aspects of masculinity, that kind of warriorship. I had like an aversion to it. Yeah. And I went big and soft. Right. Because I needed the healing. Yeah. Yeah. You know what I mean? So that's how I got into that. And then I ended up kind of moving out of that to get back into the yang, which happened somewhere around like 35 years old. But my soft thing was about healing myself. I think it was a matter of life or death for me. So that's how I ended up in it. And of course, as we talked before I hit the record button, sports were big for me. And I can't remember what inspired me to do it. But one time I was like, I wonder what happened to the cast of everyone that was in Vision Quest. Like, I know that Michael Schoflin quit. I know Modine became huge. Forrest Whitaker, huge. Like, what happened to that dude that played Shute? And I looked it up, and you had some kind of a healing business, or or are you still doing that?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, my first 28 years were kind of like I was, becoming a warrior, and I experienced a lot of different things, and then Vision Quest took me in a whole nother direction because I wanted to be a bodybuilder at that point in my life. I was, I had read autobiography of bodybuilder by, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And so I left high school, or I actually I wrestled, just so you know, some people ask this too. I wrestled in high school for 3 years. I didn't wrestle my senior year. I switched over and I played tennis, interesting enough. And I know, it's crazy. Like, you would never think of shoot on a tennis court, but I actually got a tennis scholarship to this. It's a little 2-year college here, North Idaho College. And I thought that it was going to be a whole new level of college, was going to be so challenging and great. And I found the classes just weren't as stimulating as I wanted. And then I decided, like, no, I'm going to be a bodybuilder. So I was only there for almost an entire semester. And then I left. And I'm going to go be a bodybuilder. And my dad said, well, you're going to have to make a living. So I became an iron worker. He says, he was an iron worker. He says, they're doing a lot of work out there in Tri-Cities. So I got to see what it's like to be, do what my dad did for 30 years. And that was humbling. I got to tell you, I worked out in Hanford nuclear site and as an iron worker, and I was an apprentice. And I walked out on that first day. There was 3 of us, 3 apprentices walked out. And within 3 years, I was actually as an iron worker for 4. I became a journeyman. And then in the beginning, just even within the first 3 years, one of those guys that I walked out there with died. He fell off the wall and died. Dude. And I was one of his pallbearers. And so every day you had this, like, you could be killed. This is grown-up stuff that you're dealing with. I mean, it was like, if I got a big dose of, like, here's what real men do. And I looked around, and these iron workers were just tough as nails. And we would work in the summer. It got up to 134 degrees one day out there in the desert, because you go out in the desert, you dig this deep hole, and you start building, and then you start pushing in the sand. And so you're out there in the middle of the desert in a hole with a bunch of other people with a bunch of other iron, and it's blazing hot. And these 13 rebar, they're called size 13, about like this big around, 60 feet long. You're wrapping them around this containment, and there's like 3-4 feet of that, and then a space, and then 3-4 feet of that again, and then the metal wall and the similar thing on the inside. So it's like, it's very, intense to get everything together. And within one time I was looking, and there was like 15 cranes around this, nuclear site. And they're like 240, 260, foot booms. And then 2 other, what they call, tower cranes. One was 125 foot long. The other one was 350 foot long. And we looked like these little ants crawling on the wall. And so, any time you could be hit by a piece of iron, somebody could drop something and hit you and knock you off the wall. Luckily, you would be tied off if you weren't moving. You were supposed to be. But I got to tell you, wintertime came, and it was below zero out there. So I got to experience working below zero and 134 degrees, those temperature, extremes. And I love the physicalness of it because I was a bodybuilder. And so anything I can do physically, it was like, damn, I'm in. But I got like, at a certain point, I was like, I can't see myself doing this at age 50. I'm going back to school. And so I left 3 days later. And within 3 days, I was registered and in the athletic training program in Eastern Washington. And that's where I really did a deep dive into the next level, because I had all those great classes as an athletic trainer, and kinesiology and chemistry and anatomy and physiology. And so with my bodybuilding background and knowledge, that just added more things to it. And then I got to learn how to heal athletes that have had, surgery. So then I'm in, helping them rehabilitate. I love that. I love the motivation of wrestlers and actually athletes. And that's where I actually ended up getting the role of Vision Quest while I was there. And that completely turned my world around, because I had no desire, I had no thoughts of like, I'm going to be an actor until that movie. And even after I did the movie, I still went right back to school when I finished and was like, okay, I did it. That was great. And back to school. And then I get a call when it came out, when it was released, which, by the way, it took an entire year between the time we started filming. I don't know if you know this story, but we filmed for 10 weeks. Yeah. I got cast with 2.5 weeks before we started filming. And I was a bodybuilder, and so I weighed 215 pounds, and I had to drop 25 pounds in 2.5 weeks, shoot for 10 weeks, and then I thought I was done. And went back to school, went back to bodybuilding. So I got from, 115 down to 189. 215 down to 189. And it was a hard, brutal cut. If you're a wrestler, then you know what that is like. And it's like you said, it's like, that's not the way you want to do it, is to cut that hard, that quick, because it's just the wrong way to do it. But then I ended up having to do that 3 times total. So I got done with 10 weeks, went back to bodybuilding. 3 months later, they called me up. Oh, we got one more scene. So I had to drop back down again, flew to LA, went back to school. 3 months later, again, I got called up. And that last scene was the one in the bathroom where I'm wearing the jean jacket. And at that time, I would weigh 225. And I said, I'm not going down to 189. I'll go down to 200. But I can't go down to 189. That's another 11 pounds that I got to drop. I'm not doing it. So in that particular, scene, I'm 200 pounds. Whereas everywhere else, I'm 189.
I think it helps in that scene because that's the one scene where after you mix it up with Modine and then you walk away, right? And they get you from the back. I think that's one of the couple times in the movie where you're like, Shute is a fucking monster. Like you look like you filled out the jean jacket hard.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it worked out in your favor in that instance. How old were you when you filmed that movie?
So I was 26. I looked younger than my age. Matthew was 26. He also looked younger than his age. And I think Linda Fiorentino was 27. Yeah. What an extraordinary experience. And now we're here talking 40 years later. I mean, we had a 40th anniversary of February of this year was the release, 1985. So 40 years later, we're talking about how this movie still impacts people. You told me a personal story. You said you weren't a wrestler. A lot of your friends were wrestlers, but it changed your life, had an impact on you. And to me, that's like incredible. It's like, if I can do anything in the world of entertainment, it would be to inspire people to be the best version of themselves.
Yeah. That movie got me out of a dark place, man.
Oh, man.
It got me out of a dark place.
And you were 13, you were young, and nobody was probably talking about it at that time. I mean, mental health and all of that. And what do you do with somebody who's depressed and has got an eating disorder? And I mean, God bless you, man. You made it through that. But I got to tell you, when I was, my wife and I ended up doing a practice of health, fitness, and longevity. I had got my master's degree in Oriental medicine. After I'd been to LA and been doing an acting thing for 3 years, I went back to school. I wanted to get a degree and a license. And so I did that. And, it was like when I'm dealing with patients, the hardest patients for me to deal with were ones with eating disorders, because they could override their whole body's system to say, not eating. You can starve.
Yeah.
You're dying. I don't care. I'm going to stop eating. The mind was able to override that. And it was due to usually some major trauma when they were younger. I don't know if you got to the bottom of what triggered it for you.
For sure.
But it's usually a pretty traumatic event that you then, kicks you into that. And so now I need some control in my life. So how do I gain that? Now I'm going to control my eating or not control eating.
Yeah. It was like, I was like a jock and thin and taller than everybody else, and all the girls liked me. And then within like a year, I was like, the other kids grew faster, and I was like the fat, funny kid. But also the girls that used to think I was like cute, they were like, ew, gross, you're fat. Like it was in a complete turnaround.
Wow.
What's interesting is though, a couple years after that, I grew like a weed.
Again.
My knee got better. I ended up being captain of 2 sports.
Wow.
But there was that valley, like in the middle school, which was rough. And although it wasn't really healthy, I did go, look, I'm just going to go loud and swain on this shit, and I'm going to wrestle. And I'm just going to use the wrestling season to cut weight. And dude, I did. And so I went from like, in 2 months, I went from like 178 to 152 or 180 to 152. And I did all the wrong shit, Frank. I did sleep in a garbage bag, eat X-Lax, like, cut calories down to like Loudon Swain 600, like extra exercise, basically starvation diet, extra exercise, sleep in the garbage bag, take X-Lax, like all the worst shit. And what ended up happening was that season, I dropped the weight, but I had no musculature.
How could you even wrestle? How could you even wrestle? You had no energy. You had no energy. You're overtrained. You're probably dehydrated. You're starved. And now you're supposed to go out and wrestle.
And I was a fish the whole season. I got drilled in every match. And the training partner, I trained with a guy that was the weight above me, and he was a judo state champion. And he hip tossed me one day in practice, and I just landed wrong. And it was like a blessing in disguise. I injured my neck a little bit. But I could have gotten my neck broken that season because I had nothing. Like I had nothing. So I ended up having to not wrestle for the rest of the season. But I did drop the weight, dude. So, and it was as bad as what happened with Loudon Swain. It was as bad, just passing out. You know what I mean? Just all that stuff. But it did show me that my athleticism, I could use it to become healthier. After that, of course, I got more into weights and so on and so forth. But it did show me I did have control over the situation, and that really opened my mind. But I think the movie gets into people's hearts, like Rocky, like the Karate Kid. Here, I'm going to show you. So I have this sweatshirt. It's a little faded. For the people that are listening, we don't use video, but I'm showing Frank a sweatshirt. So you see, it's
the Thompson High sweatshirt. Looks just like the one that Matthew had on. You need to tear the pocket though in the front.
Exactly. So I have that. I wear it. I like just to test to see, because those who know. So I was doing a firearms training in Indiana. And we were using a gun range that was the local police department used. And my contact there, a friend of mine, he's friends with the local PD. That's why we're using the gun range. It's in the middle of nowhere. It's in fields, cornfields, and outside of Indianapolis. So I have that sweatshirt on, and we're at lunch break. And the cops that are friends with my friend, who we are using to use this range, they show up for lunch to come and bullshit with us. And I got the sweatshirt on, and I'm bullshitting with the one cop. And the other cop is like looking at me funny. And I'm like, what is going on here? Like, what, like, is this something wrong with this dude? Or like, is it me? Or like, what? after I got done talking to the sheriff walked away. The guy came up to me, the deputy. He was like, "Look, I don't mean to like bother you, man, but is that sweatshirt? Is that the sweatshirt from the high school from Vision Quest?" And I was like, yeah, it was. He was like, "Man, my kid wrestles. I make him watch that movie every year. We watch that movie together." So it has a power, man.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sure, you live it. Like you go all over the country, right?
Well, it's like I just got back from a con. My very first Comic-Con out in New Jersey was at a place called Chiller Theater in Parsippany, New Jersey. And listen, I've gone the last 5-6 years to tournaments to help promote wrestling tournaments and, help the NCAA raise money for the USA Wrestling. And I'm all about finding ways to promote the wrestling sport, because the wrestling sport, it's an extraordinary sport. It's probably the best sport other than gymnastics for kinesthetic awareness. And so you learn with your body in space and time like no other sport. And it's probably one of the most difficult sports I've ever done. Now, I played basketball, football, baseball. I water skied, snow skied. I played tennis. I mean, I loved just about every sport that I did. And wrestling is akin to the judo that we got exposed to when we were young. So it was just kind of a natural transition for me. And I was small, and believe it or not, I weighed 105 to 112 my freshman year. And then I was about 122 my second, 136 in junior year. And then my senior year, I was going to wrestle at 155. That's how small I was. So just know that like our family has a tendency to, late maturity. Like we just don't mature until we get into college. And there's a lot of people that don't. So wrestling was a perfect place for me because I could do my weights. I could be my whatever weight I was at, I could be in. And so I think that we all should have some fighting experience and know how to take care of ourselves if it comes to that. For whatever reason, it's good to have that knowledge, whether you need it or use it ever. If it's in your system, the person that's going to look for somebody weak to pick on won't pick on the person that has that kind of knowledge just sitting in their field. It'll be perceived by, somebody that is trying to take advantage of somebody else, not to be messing with somebody that has these skill set.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, bullying is something that we've talked about on this podcast before, and a lot of us have had experiences with that when we were young men.
I did. I taught a class for a little over 2 years, and it was called Boxer Girls. And I had some women in my practice that were like, yeah, I'd like to learn how to defend myself. So we started a group, and there was like 10 or 12 of them. And man, it was like I realized how important it was for women to have a physical outlet and to learn how to take care of themselves. And I would have them actually grab and like smash, with their knee, pull or elbow or hit with this part of their hand, and would say at the same time, no. And I got to tell you, the stuff that brought up, every woman that was in the class at some point broke down in tears because she had a moment of where she was taken advantage of. She didn't say anything or was traumatized somewhere along the way. And that physical exertion and defending themselves, saying no, stating no, like not to do anything, powerful. One of the most powerful experiences I've had. And so like, I'm all for women in wrestling. I'm all for women in martial arts. I'm all for, men and women both to take that, because once you take that, then you're more mindful about getting into those kind of, situations. And if you know what to do when you're in, you're not going to be as nervous about it. And you're also not going to be looking for it because you know that this is a no-win situation, like use it to defend yourself. Don't go out starting shit, as we say,
Yeah. There's, there's a long history in human history of women being taken advantage of and abused. And it still happens now. It's a deep psychological place for women. And I've had some experiences like that on the gun range. Actually, there's really, self-defense firearms are really growing in the African American community. And so we're talking about a community there with a history of being held down by many different things. And there are specific like African American women shooting groups, right? Where they're studying self-defense with a firearm. So I was in Atlanta doing a training, and there was a bay next to us, a shooting bay, and had one of the African American female groups was there. And we were doing our practice and they're doing their practice. And you hear, a rifle go off. And then we heard this sounded like wailing, like the deepest wailing cry. And I mean, it shook my bones, Frank. It was like from a place that I just couldn't comprehend. And we were like, what just happened? So we walked over to make sure everybody was all right. And there was the instructor, was a female, was hugging the woman, and the woman was crying. And the reason why she was crying was because she actually experienced that power, which is a phenomenal power. It's a long conversation, firearms, good and bad. But she felt that power, and she felt she was no longer just on one side of it, that she could participate in it. And, I've never heard a cry like that. So I understand what you're talking about.
There's lots of healing in that process. And that was what I was about. I was like, let's give you skills that you can use if you need to, but let's also give you a platform and a place where you can process and let go of those things that held you back, that you were traumatized with previously, that we can process through, doing physical activity and vocalizing.